Hello, my name is Ethel Gainsborough. I'm 70 years old, and I live in Wichita, Kansas. And this is the story of how my son-in-law laughed in my face when he thought he had won, but ended up losing everything because he underestimated me. You see, there's something deeply satisfying about letting people think they've outsmarted you, especially when you're an old woman. People expect you to be fragile, forgetful, easily manipulated. And my son-in-law? Oh, he played right into that illusion. He thought I was just some feeble old lady with no fight left in her. But he was wrong. So very wrong. It all began 2 years ago, when my health started to take a turn. Nothing dramatic at first, just little things. Shortness of breath when climbing stairs, occasional dizziness, hands that trembled when I was knitting. Doctors chalked it up to age, but a second opinion confirmed what I had feared deep down. Congestive heart failure. The kind that crept up slowly but surely, waiting to strike when you least expected. Now, I'm not one to wallow in self-pity. I was raised tough. My late husband, Richard, served in the military for 25 years, and I managed our household with grit and grace while he was deployed. I raised 2 children, took care of my mother till her last breath, and never once asked for more than I needed. I believe in dignity, in working for what you have, in standing tall no matter what life throws your way. But when you feel the ground beneath your feet shifting, when you realize you may not have as much time as you thought, it forces you to look at things differently. And for me, that meant facing a hard truth. I didn't trust the people who would inherit my legacy. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to see how I turned being underestimated into the most powerful decision of my life. My daughter, Lillian, married a man named Travis Nolan. Charming, successful, smooth-talking. Too smooth, if you ask me. From the moment he walked into our lives, something about him rubbed me the wrong way. He was always calculating, always watching people, figuring out what he could get from them. At first, I thought I was just being overprotective, but as the years went on, I started seeing the cracks in his perfect image. He controlled Lillian in subtle ways. She used to be full of light and independence, but slowly, she became quiet around him, deferring, apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. She stopped visiting as much. Phone calls grew shorter, and whenever I asked if everything was okay, she'd paste on a smile and say, "Of course, Mom, just busy." Travis loved money, worshipped it even. He worked as an investment consultant, one of those fancy titles that sounds legitimate but basically means he played with other people's money and hoped for the best. And when I sold my late husband's land a few years ago, a sizable plot on the outskirts of Wichita, I suddenly became very interesting to him. He'd drop hints at family dinners. "Ethel, you should let us help you manage your assets." Or, "If anything ever happens to you, don't worry. We'll make sure everything's taken care of." Smiling that fake smile of his, the kind that never reaches the eyes. I always brushed him off politely, but I remembered. And so, when the doctors told me I might not live to see another Christmas, I decided it was time to write my will. But not just any will. I wanted to make sure my wishes were respected, no matter who tried to interfere. I called my attorney, William Dorsey. He's been our family lawyer for over 3 decades. Sharp as a tack, discreet, and fiercely loyal. I told him everything about Travis, about my suspicions, about the way Lillian had changed. And together, we crafted a document so airtight that even the most slippery snake wouldn't find a way to slither through it. We structured the will so that my assets would be placed in a family trust, but with strict stipulations. If anyone contested the will, their share would be frozen indefinitely pending legal review. If anyone was found to have coerced or manipulated me, their portion would be permanently forfeited. And best of all, we arranged it so that William wouldn't read the will until all beneficiaries were present, including Travis. I didn't tell anyone what I had done, not even Lillian. I didn't want her to feel torn or manipulated herself. I just waited, quietly, patiently. Months passed. My health remained stable enough to carry on with daily life, though I tired more easily. I began preparing things, closing old accounts, organizing documents, labeling photos and heirlooms. Part of me felt a deep sadness. I wasn't afraid of death, but I hated leaving things unfinished. I hated the idea of someone like Travis walking away with a fortune he hadn't earned. Then, in late autumn, I was hospitalized with pneumonia. It hit harder than I expected. For a few days, I drifted in and out of consciousness, unsure whether I'd make it. Lillian came to visit once, but Travis didn't. I wasn't surprised. When I recovered and returned home, something had shifted in me. I was done playing nice, done pretending. I asked William to schedule the reading of the will, just in case. 2 weeks later, we gathered in his office. Lillian and Travis sat across from me, dressed in matching navy blue outfits like they were attending a brunch, not a legal proceeding. Travis looked smug, confident, like he'd already mentally deposited my money into his account. William began reading the document, his voice calm and deliberate. And when he got to the part about the stipulations, about the trust, the penalties, the consequences, Travis laughed, loudly. "You're kidding, right?" he said. "You seriously think this is going to hold up in court? She's old, she's sick, she probably didn't even know what she was signing." That's when William slid a thick folder across the table. "Inside this file," he said, "you'll find video documentation of every meeting we had, every clause, every line, every decision, made by Ethel of her own volition, witnessed and notarized." Travis's face turned pale. "And as of this moment," William added, "your assets have been frozen pending investigation. Any attempt to transfer funds, access bank accounts, or liquidate property will result in criminal charges." You could have heard a pin drop. Travis stood up, livid. "This is absurd. You can't do this." But William just smiled politely. "Actually, we can. And we have." Lillian looked like she was going to cry. She whispered, "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I looked her straight in the eyes. "Because I wanted to see what you would do when the mask came off." That was the moment everything changed. And now, everything was finally in motion. Travis didn't take humiliation well. The moment we left the lawyer's office, he stormed off without another word, leaving Lillian scrambling after him like a shadow, desperate not to be left behind. I watched them through the window of William's office, her pleading hands, his sharp gestures. Even then, I wasn't sure whether I had lost my daughter forever, or if this was the only way to get her back. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. I expected a flurry of phone calls or legal threats, but there was only silence. I didn't know whether it meant Travis was regrouping, or if he finally realized that he'd underestimated the one woman in his life who refused to be controlled. I stayed alert, though. I wasn't naive. The type of man who laughs at a dying woman's final wishes doesn't surrender easily. It was a week later when I got the call from Lillian. She wanted to talk, alone. I agreed to meet her at Riverside Park. It was a crisp Kansas afternoon, the trees showing the first blush of fall. The wind carried a scent of dry leaves and possibility. She arrived wearing sunglasses, but I saw the redness around her eyes, and the hesitation in her step. My daughter, once so confident and joyful, looked like a wilted version of herself. "Mom," she said quietly, "what happened at that office? It blindsided me." "Did it?" I asked. Because it didn't blindside him. He was laughing before the papers were even finished being read. She sighed. "Travis didn't know what was in the will. I swear he didn't." "And you?" I asked, my voice firmer than I intended. "Did you?" Lillian looked down at her hands. "No. I mean, I didn't think you'd do something like that. I guess I assumed we'd talk first." "We haven't really talked in years, Lillian," I replied. And I started wondering why. Why my own daughter couldn't call unless it was about birthdays or holidays. Why I felt more like an obligation than a mother. Her silence confirmed what I already feared. She'd been drifting away from me long before that day in William's office. I used to think it was just life pulling her in different directions, but I realized now it was something more corrosive. Travis had reshaped her world, and in doing so, he'd pushed me out of it. "I miss you, Mom," she said suddenly. "And I didn't know how to fix it without hurting him." "He's already hurt enough people," I said. "It's time you stopped protecting him." Tears welled in her eyes. I reached across the bench and took her hand in mine. It was cold, trembling slightly, just like mine used to do in the early stages of my illness. Maybe this was our moment. Maybe, just maybe, we weren't too far gone. But redemption has its own timeline. 3 days later, William called. There had been an attempt to access a joint account, one that Lillian and Travis shared. The account had my name listed as a co-signer, back when Richard was still alive, and we used it to help with their down payment on their house. I'd forgotten all about it, but Travis hadn't. The moment he realized there was still a financial link between us, he tried to exploit it. Fortunately, William had anticipated it and secured the account along with the others. Still, it was a reminder. Travis wasn't done. I started receiving anonymous letters in the mail, plain envelopes, no return address. The notes were short, threatening, but veiled in just enough ambiguity to avoid police interest. Enjoy your money while you can. You'll regret doing this to your own family. People like you die alone. Nasty words scribbled in what looked like handwriting altered to be unrecognizable. But I knew who they were from. I didn't need forensics. William insisted I take extra precautions. We had my phone checked, my locks replaced, and my online accounts triple encrypted. He even introduced me to a cybersecurity expert who helped me set up digital defenses stronger than a small bank. It might have seemed excessive to someone else, but I wasn't taking chances. I wasn't going to let Travis destroy what little peace I had left in my years. Meanwhile, Lillian's visits became more frequent. At first, she'd come alone, bringing homemade soup or fresh flowers, trying to bridge a gap with small gestures. I let her. I didn't push. We talked about the past. Good memories, simple ones. Vacations we took when she was a girl. The night her father and I taught her how to ride a bike. The birthday where we surprised her with a golden retriever puppy, Max, who'd become her best friend. Moments that reminded her of who she used to be before Travis came along and built a cage around her. One evening, as we sat in the living room watching reruns of Murder, She Wrote, she turned to me and asked, "Did you ever really like him?" I paused. "No, not even at the beginning?" "Especially not at the beginning," I said. "You were too bright, too strong." And I watched that light dim year after year. It broke my heart, Lillian. "I wanted to believe he loved me," she whispered. "Wanting to believe something doesn't make it true," I replied. That was the first time she cried in front of me in years. Soon after, the second wave hit. Travis filed a motion. He claimed I was mentally unfit when I wrote the will, that the medications I was on at the time clouded my judgment. It was laughable, really. William had anticipated it and kept medical records on file to prove otherwise. But it showed his desperation. He was grasping, clawing, losing ground. And that made him dangerous. Lillian found out about the motion when she was served papers at home. She called me sobbing. "He's suing you. He's really doing it." I nodded calmly on the phone. "Let him. He's only digging his own grave." But beneath that calm, my heart was racing. Not from fear, from sadness. No matter how this ended, there was no going back to what we used to have. My daughter had been married to a man who saw family as nothing more than a financial opportunity, and she let it happen, whether from love or fear or denial. She stood by as he tried to twist everything I ever stood for. But the lawsuit turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The court proceedings forced everything into the open. Depositions were recorded, financial records were subpoenaed, and skeletons. Oh, they danced right out of Travis's closet. Gambling debts hidden under offshore accounts, manipulated portfolios, quiet payoffs to silence former clients. William had hired a forensic accountant who uncovered it all, and by the time it was laid out in court, the judge didn't just uphold the will. He referred Travis to federal authorities for further investigation. I'll never forget the look on Travis's face when that gavel came down. It wasn't anger or even fear. It was disbelief. As if he still couldn't understand how his world had unraveled, as if the idea of losing to a 70-year-old woman was so foreign, he hadn't prepared for the possibility. After the hearing, Lillian stayed behind as Travis was escorted away for questioning. She stood beside me, silent for a long while. "I think I'm ready," she said finally. "For what?" "To live without him." That was the moment I knew I had won more than a legal battle. I had won my daughter back. The house felt different after that. Not quieter. No, it had always been quiet since Richard passed, but lighter. There was a shift in the air, a strange kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. Lillian started coming by more often, not with flowers or soup this time, but just herself. We talked about the past, yes, but we also talked about the present, and tentatively, the future. She was finally seeing what I had seen for years, that Travis wasn't just a mistake in her life, he was a fracture. And if she didn't heal it now, it would leave her permanently bent. One morning in early November, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of burning leaves and the dry rustle of changing seasons. I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee from my favorite chipped mug, when I saw a black SUV slowly drive past my house. It wasn't a neighbor's car. I knew every make and model on this block like the back of my hand. I watched it crawl by once, then again 10 minutes later, this time slower. I called William immediately. "I think someone's watching the house," I told him. He didn't hesitate. "Stay inside. I'll send someone over." He had a friend, a retired state trooper named Jim, who now worked as a private investigator. Jim came by within the hour. Large frame, cowboy boots, quiet voice. He asked a few questions, inspected the driveway and street, and left a small camera tucked near the mailbox post, just in case. By the next morning, Jim had pulled the plates off the SUV. It was registered to one of Travis's shell companies, the kind he'd used for years to hide money. That alone wasn't proof of anything illegal, but it confirmed what we already knew. Travis wasn't letting go. The situation escalated quickly from there. First, Lillian's car was vandalized in the parking lot of her office. Nothing stolen, just damage. Scratched paint, a smashed taillight, a note under the windshield wiper that said, "Traitors pay." She reported it, of course. But Wichita PD couldn't do much without witnesses or footage. Still, it shook her. She came over that night, shaken and pale, her hands trembling like mine used to on bad days. "I'm scared," she admitted, and I had to fight the instinct to wrap her in my arms like she was a child again. "You're doing the right thing," I told her. "That doesn't mean it won't be hard." The second incident happened just days later. Someone tried to break into William's office after hours. They didn't get far. There were alarms, cameras, everything a small-town lawyer could need. But it was clear now. Travis wasn't just angry. He was unraveling. All his efforts to manipulate and control had failed, and he didn't know how to cope with power slipping through his fingers. William and I sat down that weekend to revise the security around the estate. The family trust had already been locked down, but we took an additional step, placing the entirety of my assets, real estate, investments, even heirlooms, under the management of an independent trustee. That way, if anything happened to me, Lillian wouldn't have to fight for a thing. Everything would be distributed exactly as outlined. No loopholes, no delays. And most importantly, no Travis. That same night, Lillian asked to stay over. It had been years since we shared the same roof overnight. I gave her the guest room, which still had a quilt she made in high school tucked on the shelf. She stood in the doorway, holding it in her hands like it was a memory she could still touch. "He always told me you were trying to turn me against him," she said quietly. "That you wanted to control me. I wanted to protect you," I replied. "But I knew you wouldn't see that until you were ready." She turned and looked at me with eyes that had finally opened. "I'm ready now," and I believed her. The next morning, she called a divorce attorney. Travis didn't take the news well. According to her lawyer, he yelled so loudly during their mediation meeting that the receptionist had to ask him to leave. He called her names, threatened to ruin her, accused her of conspiring with me to rob him of everything. The truth was, she was only taking what was rightfully hers, nothing more. But Travis had always believed everything was his by default, that people existed to orbit around his ego. Then came the letter, a formal notification from the IRS. Turns out, Travis had neglected to file full disclosures on several of his companies for multiple years. The federal investigation triggered by his attempt to challenge my will had unearthed a treasure trove of financial irregularities, offshore holdings, underreported income, even false deductions. And someone, either a former client or a betrayed associate, had tipped them off. They were building a case. And it was strong. I didn't rejoice, not exactly, but I felt something close to justice warming my bones. But just as we thought the worst had passed, something happened that changed the game completely. Lillian's lawyer called with urgent news. Travis had filed for full spousal support, alimony. He claimed she had become financially dependent on him and that the stress of the legal battles had rendered him unable to work. It was absurd, laughable even, but it was also dangerous. If a judge believed even part of it, it could delay or complicate the divorce process. It could keep him tethered to her life just long enough to do more harm. And then, one night, something unexpected happened. I received a knock at the door. It was nearly midnight. The porch light revealed a thin young woman in a navy hoodie, eyes swollen from crying. She looked lost, scared. I opened the door cautiously. "Are you Ethel Gainsborough?" she asked. I nodded. "My name is Zoe. I used to work for Travis." She hesitated, as if weighing whether she could trust me. "I saw what he did to your daughter," she said. "I saw the things he did to you. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." I stepped aside, letting her in without another word. She sat at my kitchen table, sipping tea, trembling slightly. And then she told us everything. Travis had used her for years, first professionally, then personally, promised promotions, dangled money, manipulated her into silence. She had access to emails, financial records, even audio recordings. Proof, real proof. "I kept copies," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do with them, but I think they could help you." And just like that, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Zoe's evidence wasn't just a smoking gun. It was the whole damn arsenal. It corroborated everything we suspected, and more. It painted Travis not just as a manipulator, but as a fraud, a predator, and a man so obsessed with power that he didn't care who he destroyed. We gave it to William. He turned it over to the authorities, and within 2 weeks, federal charges were filed. Wire fraud, tax evasion, witness tampering. The list kept growing, and with it, Travis's future kept shrinking. The turning point had come, not with a dramatic outburst or a violent confrontation, but with quiet persistence, truth, and a woman brave enough to come forward. And for the first time in years, I finally felt like I could exhale. The first time I stood outside my home after everything came crashing down, I noticed something peculiar. The leaves that had piled up across the front steps, once a chore I dreaded, looked almost beautiful in the morning light. Golden, brittle, a sea of amber and rust. It struck me then, when you've spent years surviving, every small, ordinary thing feels like a quiet victory. Lillian had moved back in with me temporarily. She said it was just until the divorce was finalized and she could find her own place. But I could tell she wasn't ready to be alone. And, to be honest, neither was I. The silence in the house had always been heavy since Richard passed, but with Lillian there, it softened. It filled with her footsteps, her laughter coming back in bits and pieces, her voice humming in the kitchen like she used to when she was 16, and still believed the world was fair. Healing wasn't sudden. It crept in the same way the pain once had, slowly, delicately. At first, Lillian barely spoke of Travis. When she did, it was only to report a court date, a legal update, a new document to sign. I didn't press her. She needed to process it on her own terms, just like I had needed to when I realized my own daughter had slipped away from me years ago without even noticing. But the thing about truth is, once it's out, it demands space. One night, we were folding laundry together in the living room, a sitcom murmuring quietly in the background. I was matching socks when she suddenly stopped, held a sweater in her hands, and said, "He made me feel like I was nothing. For years." I didn't respond. I let her speak. "He told me I was lucky he chose me, that I wasn't strong enough to make it on my own. He said my friends only tolerated me, that even you would grow tired of me if I didn't do what he expected." Her voice cracked. And I believed him. I set the socks aside and reached for her hand. "Lillian," I said gently, "abuse doesn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it hides in compliments, in small decisions made for you, in the silence you're told to keep." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "I thought you hated me. I thought you blamed me for staying." "I never hated you," I said. "I just missed you. I missed the girl who danced barefoot in the yard and painted her dreams on bedroom walls. I never stopped waiting for her to come back." And in that moment, she wept the kind of cry that only comes after years of holding everything in. The next day, we started rebuilding. It began with small things. rearranging furniture, clearing out closets, donating old clothes, repainting the guest room, not because any of it truly needed to be done, but because it gave us purpose, a rhythm. Each brushstroke on the wall felt like a reclaiming of space. Each drawer sorted was another corner of her life no longer connected to him. Meanwhile, the legal process moved forward. Travis's assets remained frozen. With the evidence Zoe had provided and the forensic audit completed, it was no longer just a civil issue. It was criminal. He was indicted formally. His face even appeared in the local news, that polished, smug grin replaced with something hollow and haunted. Zoe, bless her, decided to testify. William arranged for her protection and a separate attorney. She had nothing to gain, really. No payout, no promise of glory, just the peace of knowing she'd finally told the truth. She came over a few times, quiet and nervous at first, but eventually warming up to Lillian. The two of them had more in common than I think either expected. Both women manipulated by the same man, both fighting to recover what they lost, and both stronger than they realized. It was during one of Zoe's visits that I saw something change in Lillian. The way she listened, the way she encouraged, the way she comforted. It was like watching her remember who she was, empathetic, nurturing, fierce when she needed to be. I saw her laugh that night, a full, real laugh, the kind that came from the gut and didn't stop abruptly, the kind you don't fake. Days turned into weeks, and the routines we built started to feel permanent. Lillian took a leave of absence from her job, not because she had to, but because she needed time. Time to breathe, to sleep without fear, to find her own thoughts again. We started walking around the neighborhood in the mornings. It was a slow pace, given my health, but we both enjoyed it. The sound of birds, the smell of distant wood smoke, the sight of school buses passing by. It was grounding, a reminder that life was still out there, waiting. Then came the hearing. It wasn't a trial, yet, but it was important. The judge would determine if Travis's accounts could remain frozen permanently and whether the charges against him would proceed to full prosecution. We went together, the three of us, Lillian, Zoe, and me. We sat in the second row, just behind the prosecution bench. Travis entered the courtroom in a navy suit, but the confidence he once carried like a shield was gone. He looked smaller, paler, like someone trying to hold on to a version of himself that no longer existed. He wouldn't look at us. The lawyers presented everything: bank statements, emails, audio files, testimonies. Zoe's statement was read into the record, and when it came time for the judge to rule, she didn't hesitate. All assets would remain frozen. The court found sufficient cause to move forward with criminal proceedings. Travis was placed under strict travel restrictions, forced to surrender his passport, and was scheduled for arraignment the following month. He was finally cornered. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Lillian turned to me and asked, "Do you think he'll ever change?" I didn't answer right away. The wind blew her hair across her face, and I tucked a strand behind her ear, like I used to when she was a child. "I don't think he knows how," I said. "But you did. You changed. That's what matters." That night, Lillian sat on the back porch with me as the stars emerged, dotting the sky like lanterns. We talked about nothing and everything. About Richard. About Max the dog. About the garden she wanted to plant when spring came back around. I told her she should do it, that this house could use color again. "I want sunflowers," she said, "like the ones in that photo with Dad. Remember?" I did. That picture had been taken on a road trip when she was 12. Richard had pulled over beside a field and lifted her onto his shoulders so she could see above the tall yellow heads. She had grinned so wide, her cheeks ached for days. That was before life had gotten complicated, before pain had taught us its many faces. "You'll have sunflowers," I promised her. And I meant it. We were far from done. There were still hearings to attend, papers to file, statements to give. But something had shifted irrevocably inside both of us. The bitterness was fading. Not gone, but replaced slowly with something else. Gratitude, quiet joy, the fragile beginning of peace. And sometimes, that's enough to keep going. The night before the arraignment, I couldn't sleep. Even with all that had happened, the revelations, the rebuilding, the justice inching forward, I still felt that old knot in my stomach. It was a familiar thing, like an unwelcome guest who'd overstayed its visit. I sat by the window in my bedroom, watching the wind move through the trees, the way the branches danced in slow agony against the Kansas moonlight. Wichita was calm that night, but I wasn't. There was no part of me that doubted Travis would be charged. The evidence was overwhelming. The fraud, the manipulation, the money he'd siphoned through lies and charm. It was all exposed now, but what I feared was his last card. Because men like him don't go down quietly. They kick and claw, and if they can't win, they burn what's left. The next morning, the courthouse was packed tighter than it had ever been. The news had caught wind of the story weeks earlier. Local investor indicted in multi-million-dollar fraud, the headline had read. But what really drew them in was the twist. The elderly mother-in-law, the contested will, the surprise witness, the decades of deceit. They called it the Gainsborough case, like it was a soap opera. I hated that part. To them, it was a spectacle. But to me, it was the last breath of a storm that had nearly drowned my family. Lillian and I sat side by side in the courtroom, Zoe just behind us. She wore a navy blazer and clutched her statement in trembling fingers. She was brave, showing up like that. I knew how much it cost her. Testifying against someone who once held you captive emotionally, it reopens wounds you thought had healed. Travis entered flanked by his attorneys, a forced grin on his face, like he still believed this was all a misunderstanding, some bureaucratic overreach. He glanced toward us once, not with apology, not even with anger, just a flicker of recognition, like someone checking an old grocery list and finding nothing interesting. The judge arrived. The room stood still, and the proceedings began. The prosecutor's voice was calm but sharp, every word deliberate. They presented evidence in layers, emails showing forged signatures, bank transfers to offshore accounts, falsified client reports. Then came the personal testimonies. A former co-worker, a defrauded investor, and then Zoe. She stood up, walked to the front, and took her oath with a voice steadier than I expected. She told them everything. How he lured her into complicity with promises of wealth and promotion. How he kept her silent with threats wrapped in affection. How he forced her to erase emails, fabricate financial statements, and manipulate documents. Her voice never wavered. She didn't cry, but by the time she finished, the courtroom was silent, hanging on her every word. And then, to my surprise, Lillian asked to speak. Her lawyer tried to stop her. The prosecution didn't expect it, but the judge allowed it, and Lillian stood tall, dressed simply, no makeup, no jewelry, just herself. I was married to Travis Nolan for 18 years, she began, and I lived most of those years in fear. She spoke of isolation, of gaslighting, of how he convinced her she was worthless, dependent, and burdensome. She didn't make herself a victim. She simply told the truth, the raw, heartbreaking, unvarnished truth. She spoke of watching him manipulate others, especially my mother, and of the guilt she carried for not seeing it sooner. And finally, she said something that caught everyone's attention. He laughed when he thought he had won, she said. He laughed at my mother's will. He mocked her, right in front of her. But she had planned for this. She was always stronger than he knew. And today I stand here not as his ex-wife, not as a victim, but as a woman who finally remembered how to choose herself. When she returned to her seat, she took my hand in hers and didn't let go. Travis's defense tried to counter, of course. They called into question Zoe's credibility. They claimed Lillian was bitter, angry, coerced by me. They painted me as a manipulative matriarch bent on revenge. I almost laughed at that. If only they knew how long I held back. But the court didn't buy it. The judge ruled that there was ample evidence to proceed with full prosecution on multiple felony charges. Bail was denied. Travis was remanded into custody until his trial date. And just like that, the gavel came down. It should have been the end, but it wasn't. As we exited the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Microphones in our faces, cameras flashing. Lillian turned her face away. Zoe stayed behind. I looked into the lens of one camera that got too close and said just one thing: protect your daughters before they forget how to protect themselves. And then we left. But the climax wasn't just in that courtroom. It came later that night. when I returned home and found a letter waiting in the mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Just my name in sharp, uneven handwriting. I knew even before I opened it that it was from him. It wasn't long. You think you've won, but you haven't. People like you don't walk away clean. I burned it in the sink. Because I had walked away clean. Not untouched. Not unscarred. But free. Lillian made tea that evening. Chamomile. She said I looked like I needed it. And maybe I did. I sat on the couch with my feet curled under me like I used to when I was young, and she handed me the cup with both hands, as if passing something sacred. What now? She asked. Now. That question had lingered in the back of my mind for months. Now that he was gone. Now that the legal fights were behind us. Now that the house no longer echoed with fear. What now? I plant sunflowers, I said, sipping the tea. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. We stayed up late that night, not talking about anything important. Just the way the air smelled like winter, how the stars were clearer than usual, what kind of curtains might look good in the kitchen. It was small talk. But after everything, it felt like the most important conversation of our lives. And in that quiet, I realized the climax of the story wasn't about Travis being locked away. It wasn't even about the courtroom victory or the headlines. It was about the reclaiming of our voices, our lives, our names. Ethel Gainsborough. I whispered it aloud to myself as I got ready for bed that night. He had tried to erase me, to reduce me to a weak old woman who wouldn't fight back. But here I was, stronger, louder, more alive than I'd been in decades. And I knew this story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who had ever been silenced, every mother who'd had to watch her daughter suffer, every soul who'd stood alone in the dark and chose to light a match rather than wait for the dawn. We lit the whole damn sky. The days after the arraignment settled into a strange kind of peace, the kind that feels earned, but fragile. Like a quiet morning after a terrible storm, where the skies are clear but the earth still remembers being torn apart. Wichita carried on, as it always had. Kids caught buses, neighbors mowed lawns, people filled grocery carts and talked about the weather. But in our little world, something fundamental had shifted. Lillian and I began building a life that belonged only to us. It started with small habits. Mornings became our sacred hour. She'd rise first, start a pot of coffee, and I'd follow a little later with my slippers dragging against the hardwood floor. We'd sit by the kitchen window, watching the sun pour over the fence line, and talk about nothing in particular. We didn't need to fill the silence anymore. Silence had become a friend instead of a threat. She filed the final divorce papers 2 weeks after the arraignment. Travis tried to delay the process, even sent word through his lawyer asking for one last conversation. She refused. No letters, no visits, no closure. Because sometimes closure isn't found in a conversation. It's found in choosing not to have one. The judge granted the divorce without contest. The house Lillian once shared with Travis was sold, and the money, what little could be salvaged from his frozen assets, was divided cleanly. But Lillian didn't want the house. It never felt like mine, she told me. It was his stage and I was just a prop. Instead, she stayed with me, and slowly we began transforming the place together. It started with the porch swing. We re-stained the wood, added new cushions, hung potted plants from the beams. Then came the garden. It had been a mess for years, overgrown and neglected, but we cleared it out one weekend, just the two of us, and a rented tiller. She planted sunflowers just like she promised. And when they bloomed, tall and golden, I stood in the middle of them with tears running down my cheeks, remembering Richard's laugh and the weight of a little girl on his shoulders. She also went back to work eventually, not at her old job. She didn't want to return to that world. Instead, she started working with a local nonprofit that helped women leaving abusive relationships. She didn't tell them her story right away. She didn't need to. They saw it in her eyes, in the way she listened without judgment, in how she made space for their voices without trying to fill the gaps. One of the women she mentored said something I'll never forget. You don't have to survive the fire to help someone out of it. But when you do, your hands know exactly how to pull. Meanwhile, Travis's trial date approached. The federal charges stuck. His lawyers tried for a plea bargain, but the prosecution wouldn't budge. The weight of Zoe's testimony, combined with the trail of forged documents and hidden accounts, made the case watertight. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Local reporters returned. Sketch artists filled their notebooks. Even people who didn't know us seemed invested. Strangers sent letters, some offering prayers, others sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. On the day of the trial, Zoe stood before the judge and spoke again. She looked him in the eye and told him she wasn't afraid of him anymore. Lillian didn't testify that day. She didn't need to. Her words had already carved themselves into the walls of that courtroom during the arraignment. My statement was submitted in writing. I didn't want to see him again. I had already said everything that needed saying. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month, but we already knew he was going away for a long time, not just for the fraud, not just for the lies, but because the court had seen the totality of who he was, the manipulation, the control, the way he weaponized charm like a tool of war. He was a man who believed the world owed him, and now he would finally pay. The day we got the news, Lillian didn't cry. She didn't celebrate either. She simply sat down beside me on the porch swing, took my hand, and said, "He can't touch us anymore." And he couldn't. That summer, the sunflowers reached higher than we expected. Some nearly touched the gutter. Children from the neighborhood would stop to admire them, sometimes asking if they could take one home. We always said yes, because something about seeing a flower, tall and proud, gifted freely, felt like a blessing, like a message. Things can grow again, even after fire. I spent more time in the garden than I ever had. My heart condition hadn't disappeared. There were still days I needed to rest, still pills lined up neatly beside my bed. But I felt stronger, not just physically, in every way that matters. I was no longer the woman lying in a hospital bed wondering if she would die before being heard. I had been heard. My voice had echoed through courtrooms, through news articles, through whispered conversations between mothers and daughters across Wichita. And Lillian, my beautiful, brave Lillian. She began painting again. It started one rainy afternoon when the power went out. She found an old box of supplies in the attic, canvases warped with time, paint tubes half dried, brushes still tucked in their sleeves. She sat by the window with a candle beside her and began to paint. The first was a sunflower, the second was a porch swing, and the third was a woman's silhouette, strong, upright, staring out at a sky full of stars. She hung it in the hallway outside our bedrooms. "I call it Becoming," she said. I think she didn't name it for herself. She named it for us both. By autumn, the leaves returned to the steps again, brittle and golden, like they had the year before. But this time, I didn't dread them. I swept them up slowly, listening to the wind, feeling the weight of each one without resentment. They were part of the season, and the season had changed. Travis was gone, locked away. His name, though still occasionally whispered by the curious, no longer held power here. We didn't speak of him much anymore. We didn't need to. Our lives had moved forward, past him, beyond him. Some nights, I sit alone in the garden, wrapped in a blanket, and watch the stars. I think of Richard, of what he'd say if he were here, of how proud he'd be of Lillian, of the fight we fought together. And I imagine him smiling, just like he did the day we brought Max home, shaking his head and saying, "Ethel, you never did let anyone steal the sky from you." He'd be right. Because in the end, it wasn't about money. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about reclaiming something that was taken in whispers. Dignity, voice, family. And we got it all back. A year has passed since the sentencing, and if someone were to ask me how life feels now, I'd say it feels earned, not perfect, not carefree, but deeply, unshakably earned. The kind of peace that grows from the cracks of what was once shattered. I'm 71 now. Time has etched its story into my skin and slowed my steps, but it has also made me sharper in ways I never expected. I've learned that healing doesn't erase the pain. It simply teaches you how to carry it without breaking. Wichita moves slower in the fall. The sidewalks feel quieter. The skies somehow larger. There's a kind of hush that settles over everything, like the town is holding its breath before winter. I love this time of year. The evenings come early. The air turns crisp, and the light becomes softer, more golden. It reminds me of the hours just after sunrise, filled with stillness and new beginnings. Our home has become a sanctuary. Lillian still lives here. She could have found her own place by now. She's financially stable again, emotionally steady, but neither of us has brought it up. I think we both know there's no rush. After spending so many years drifting apart, we're not in any hurry to let go of what we've rebuilt. She teaches painting now, a small class at the community center every Thursday evening. Mostly women, a few teenagers, people who show up with hands full of doubt and leave covered in color and confidence. I attended one of her classes once, just to sit quietly in the back and watch. She was radiant, her voice calm, her instructions encouraging. I watched a young girl struggle to draw the curve of a sunflower petal, and without hesitation, Lillian knelt beside her and said, "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours." That's when I realized my daughter had become a woman other women could lean on. As for me, I found joy in the slow, deliberate rituals of everyday life. I bake more often now. I even taught Zoe how to make my mother's apple pie from scratch, crust and all. She comes by on Sundays, sometimes with her new boyfriend, a quiet young man with gentle eyes and an easy laugh. He helps me bring in groceries and insists on taking out the trash before he leaves. I never thought I'd see her so calm, so free. Zoe's testimony helped dozens of others come forward. Women, clients, employees, people who had once been too afraid to speak. Her courage cracked open something much bigger than our family's battle. It exposed a network of manipulation, a trail of destruction Travis had left behind in his pursuit of power. The headlines faded eventually, but the impact did not. She started working with a victims advocacy group now, gives talks in schools, offers resources, listens more than she speaks. She told me once that coming forward didn't fix her, but it gave her back the pieces she needed to start. Sometimes I sit on the back porch and look out at the garden. The sunflowers are gone for the season, wilted and bowed, but even their dried stalks stand with a certain pride. We've added more now, roses, lavender, even a little vegetable patch that somehow keeps the rabbits away. The yard has become a quilt of second chances, a living metaphor. One morning, while pruning the roses, I found an envelope tucked under the flower pot near the porch steps. My hands went still. For a second I thought, no, hoped. It might be from Richard. Silly, I know, but grief doesn't follow rules. It simply lives beside you, quiet and patient. It wasn't from Richard, it was from someone else. There was no signature, just a note that read, "You were right to fight. I see that now. I hope someday I'll be forgiven." The handwriting wasn't Travis's. It was Lillian's. And though she never mentioned writing it, I recognized the curve of the L, the way she looped her Y's. I didn't bring it up. I didn't need to. That letter wasn't meant to start a conversation. It was her final apology, a way to put down the last weight she'd been carrying. I folded it gently and placed it in my keepsake box, between a letter Richard had written me from overseas in 1973 and a Polaroid of Lillian on her 12th birthday, holding Max by the ears and laughing uncontrollably. Every life has its turning points, moments you can't return from. Some are painful, others are beautiful, and some, like this one, are both. I joined a local women's group recently, not for support, though it offers plenty, but for connection, for laughter and shared stories and afternoons spent sipping tea in mismatched mugs. We talk about books, grandchildren, aches that move through our bones like stubborn ghosts. One woman, a widow named Grace, told me over lemon pound cake that she hadn't laughed in 2 years until she heard me tell the story about chasing raccoons off my roof with a flashlight and a broom. I liked that. I've started writing too. Nothing formal, just pages in a notebook. Memories, thoughts, observations. I write about Richard's favorite records, about the day Lillian got her driver's license, about the first time I heard her cry after the divorce was final, not from sorrow, but from relief. I don't know what I'll do with those pages, but they bring me comfort. Maybe one day Lillian will read them, or maybe they're just for me. The trial is over. Travis was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 8. He filed an appeal, of course, but it was denied. I don't think about him much anymore. He used to occupy every corner of my thoughts, like a shadow I couldn't outrun. But now he's faded, a chapter closed, a name I don't speak out loud, not because I'm afraid, but because I've outgrown the need. We had a small celebration after the sentencing. Not a party, nothing loud or indulgent, just a quiet dinner in the backyard. Me, Lillian, Zoe, a few close friends. We lit candles, ate grilled corn and roast chicken, shared slices of that apple pie we now all make with slight variations. We raised our glasses, iced tea and lemonade, and toasted to freedom, to peace, to the strange, wonderful journey that had brought us all to that exact moment under a canopy of fading light and drifting fireflies. Later that night, Lillian sat beside me as I rocked gently in my chair. "I used to think your strength was in how you stood up to him," she said. "And now?" I asked. She rested her head on my shoulder. "Now I know it was how you never gave up on me." The stars came out one by one, and we sat in silence, listening to the sounds of a world that for once wasn't crumbling. No reporters, no subpoenas, no threats behind the mailbox, just the hum of insects and the soft rise and fall of our breathing. I don't know what the next years will hold. I don't pretend life won't offer up new challenges, but I do know this. I am not afraid anymore. Because I have lived through the fire, and I did not come out burned. I came out blazing. Have you ever had to protect someone you love from someone they trusted? Someone who wore a mask for years? Share your story in the comments. If Ethel's journey moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of strength, justice, and personal rebirth. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to reclaim your voice. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you are never too old, too quiet, or too broken to rise.